This video connects the stories and ARG of Pony Island, the Hex, and Inscryption into one comprehensive guide. While I shouldn't have to say this, there will be full spoilers for all three games. If you haven't played them, I must recommend it, especially Inscryption. It's a wonderful game that you get the most out of on your first playthrough. If you refuse to, well, I suppose I can't exactly stop you from watching, but I do recommend having a base understanding of Inscryption's story. I have a full video covering it, but watching a Let's Play would do just as well. Understanding Pony Island and the Hex's story, which I also have videos on, would be useful for recognizing the characters that will appear in our story, but not strictly required to understand what's going on. Secondly, this is all my theory. I can't guarantee I'm right. Just keep that in mind. Daniel does have a tendency to be rather cryptic with his info. But with all that out of the way, we can now go back. Way back. Our story begins thousands of years in the past with the devil and his father. One, a demon lord residing in hell, and the other, well, we don't exactly know. Lucifer's father is a very vague figure, and is only ever talked about by the devil himself, calling his father pure evil, and that's coming from Satan. But whether his father is a demon like him or God himself is completely unknown. For Lucifer himself, well, we'll be seeing a lot more of him as the story continues, so I'll hold off on describing him just yet. For now, remember this. His deepest desire is to cause pain and suffering for mankind. Real shocker, right? Bet you didn't see that one coming. Unfortunately, for him at least, his powers seem to be greatly weakened when he enters the human realm. If he were to wreak havoc upon man, he would need some other way. He bided his time, formulated a plot, and got to work. Hundreds of years passed, civilizations rose and crumbled, and Satan toiled away on his creation. Only after a small millennium had gone by, Satan finalized his work. He had created an indomitable item, one filled with darkness and power. The very item that we will follow for the entirety of our story, the Karnathal Code. It came in the form of a deck of karnathal cards, used to play a game of the same name. But what gave it its power was the specific order the cards were aligned in, the Karnathal Code. It was capable of limitless destruction when manipulated by knowledgeable hands, and even more importantly, would keep its level of power even when brought to the mortal plane. I mean, this thing was powerful, even for the devil, and we still don't know what methods he used to create it. Perhaps he used his abilities as an archdemon, drawing power from the domain of hell. Or perhaps he managed to carve and give form to a carnal evil that had been around long before man. Or maybe it was built using his pure evil father as its source. Soon after the finalization of the code, but before Satan had the chance to use it against mankind, the devil was trapped, imprisoned. As much as it sucks, we also have no clue how, why, where, or even by whom he was trapped. Perhaps it was his father punishing him for creating the Karnathal Code, or perhaps he was sealed by an ancient church to stop him from activating its evil. Whether he was imprisoned in hell or on earth, by man or by his very own father, the devil lay trapped in this prison for hundreds of years. With no one guiding its overflowing power, the Karnathal Code slowly made its way through the Earth's crust and was lost with time. Centuries passed, and our story resumed during World War II, where the Karnathal Code showed up once again, finding itself in the hands of the Nazis. Now, if you haven't brushed up on your history too recently, or ever, this war was one initiated by the Nazis to solve three problems in particular.
Economic, social, and Jew.
Known for their kindness and compassion, the Nazis discovered the code's immense power and immediately got to work on exploiting it. The Karnathal Code may have been powerful, but accessing that power was no easy feat. So, Hitler himself established a top-secret task force with the goal of finding a way to control and shape this artifact's power, which they planned to use to win the war. Even with their limited time and expertise, the Nazis managed to create a powerful weapon. They had built a doomsday device with enough power to destroy half of Europe. in a time where nukes were still a relatively new thing, this would change the tide of the war. And think, the Germans had only just started experimenting with this power. Who knows what they could have achieved with more time. Luckily, such a future did not come to pass, and the Nazis were defeated by the Allies before they were ready to unleash its power. The Karnathal Code was forgotten inside of Hitler's grave, the machine they were building left under Berlin, and all those who knew of it killed or imprisoned by the Allies. All except one. At some point during the war, presumably before Germany and Russia stopped being allies, a Russian diplomat managed to overhear talk of the Karnathal Code. Of course, he couldn't just take it from the Nazis, at first because they were allies, and then because, well, they were enemies. But after the Nazis were defeated, that's when he was able to strike. The Russian diplomat sent in a small group of Soviet spies on a reconnaissance mission, headed towards Hitler's rotting corpse, where the Karnathal Code still lay. They got there, took some pictures, noted the location, and inscribed the order of the cards onto a floppy disk. Completely unknowingly, they had just created the world's most powerful hard drive, an item that would come to be known as the old data. Remember, the Karnathal Code's power comes from the specific order of its deck of cards. Just by inscribing that code onto a normal floppy disk gave that disk its power, to which the limits are still unknown. On top of gaining the Karnathal Code's power, this floppy disk's original purpose of being a storage for data was amplified to such an extent that just by being physically close to things, it could absorb their information. Although due to the chaotic power the disk now held, all the information taken in by the old data would become encrypted, requiring a skilled decoder to make any sense of it. That, or some other sort of mechanism that could decrypt the chaotic flow of its information. This newly created old data could do much more than just absorb information, it could also dispel. Not so much in the information it received, but the evil that now laid at its core, the woeful evil of the Karnathal Code. Slowly but surely, its corrupted essence seeped out from the disk, corrupting even the kindest of people if they spent too much time around it. Now, it's unclear if the old data gained these next two abilities immediately after receiving the Karnathal Code, or if they only came to be after the disk absorbed more information. Regardless, it also gained the ability to lightly influence the mind of others. Nothing intelligent, more like instinct, convincing people who would most likely benefit from its destruction to not destroy it. It was also found to have the ability to bring video game characters to life. Surely there were many more things it could have done, but the old data absorbed and adapted to its surroundings, and as it came to be surrounded with video games, that's what it came to influence. As the Russians finished up with their reconnaissance mission, the events of Pony Island took place, in which the devil finally tricked someone into freeing him from his prison by disguising himself as a lost soul. After bathing in the glory of his freedom, this entity of despair immediately returned to the human realm and found himself in the freest land of all, good old United States of A. Now, it's important to rid yourself of any preconceptions for this version of the devil. Of course, I'm not saying he suddenly turned into the second coming of Christ, but in this universe, he's much less of a god of the underworld, and more of a scheming and conniving agent of chaos. And again, he couldn't do much with his limited powers while in the human realm, not to mention the tight and disciplined security of the United States. But I do believe he had enough power to sense the general area of the Karnathal Code, whose power was now on the old data, all the way in Russia. He lacked the power to simply fly over and grab the Karnathal Code from the Soviets, so he used his head instead and began planting seeds that would eventually sprout into ruin and devastation. Mr. Lucifer sat down and initiated himself on the American dream. He got himself an education, became self-sufficient, and even started a proper business. Of course he was disguised as well, using a human body under the guise of Lou Natus. No, I'm not the devil. Why would you accuse me of that? Anyway, after a few years of setting himself up, Gamefuna was created, a seemingly normal game company with Lou Natus as their CEO. First order of command, commence development on Inscryption. It was to be a relatively simple card game, similar to all-time classics like Magic the Gathering and Pokemon. But, why exactly is the devil spending his time making a card game? I mean, I know incels share his hatred towards most of mankind, but to think the devil would go to such lengths to appeal to them. Although, perhaps he had another motive in mind. For now, we can only continue our story. At this point, it's sometime before 1991, as the Soviets are still engaged in the Cold War, but after 1971, as floppy disks are a thing. So let's go back to the Russians. The spies returned from their reconnaissance mission with floppy disk in hand, and it was quickly discovered that this disk they merely took notes on now had power rivaling the karnathal code. It's unclear if the karnathal code transferred its power to the old data, or if the power was shared between the two, but either way, the Soviets were more than satisfied with the disk's potency, and began their own experiments with it, leaving the karnathal code to rot away on Hitler's corpse. Unfortunately for the Russians, they'd even less time than the Nazis to experiment with its power, because soon after receiving it, Special Agent Barry Reginald Wilkinson stole it from right under their noses. Reggie worked with the American Department of Defense and was working as a spy in Soviet Russia during the Cold War. After picking up wind of this evil relic, he made it his mission to stop the Soviets from having such a powerful weapon, and within a few days, he had successfully stolen it. At this point, Barry didn't really know what the old data was, only that the Russians were planning on using it to gain a decisive advantage in the war, and now that he had stolen it, he was in a tight spot. So close under the nose of the Russians, he couldn't move freely, much less escape the country, so he bided his time trying to decrypt the old data's secrets. As the Russians closed in on his position, he even had to take refuge in his child's house, who they themselves were at the age of having a child of their own, Lionel Snail. Using his grandson's computer, he somehow managed to decrypt a part of the old data, revealing to him the location of the karnathal code, as well as the very order the cards were in. He had learned of the karnathal code's devastating potential, although all this info did come with its price. Barry never realized, but a small part of the old data was left on young Lionel's computer. Back in America, Lou Natas and the rest of Gamefuna had finished and released Inscryption. Satan had made some decent cash and gotten in some good practice, so he started work on his true goal, an ultimate project, his magnum opus, Inscryption. It would utilize the same cards as the original game, but would take place in a world in which 4 scribes ruled the land: Leshy, Magnificus, Grimoire, and PO3. And it is PO3, not Poe.
How is PO3 or Poe supposed to be pronounced?
I'm going to go with PO3.
Sorry, I just had to get that off my chest. Anyway, these 4 scribes were the game's bosses. The player would run around the world, collect cards, face the scribes, and at the end of the game, pick one to fight again as a souped-up final boss. Again, why Satan decided this was the optimal way to spend his time, we don't yet know. Only in continuing our story, we might learn of his true motivations. Back in Russia, Barry had discovered the karnathal code's powerful evil. He realized just how desperate his situation was, and how badly he needed to ensure that this disk didn't make its way back into Russian hands, who would surely use its power to create Soviet super soldiers or something else equally as evil. So he formulated a plot. The Soviets were tightly monitoring the borders of the country, so escaping with the disk in hand was out of the question, and a package sent directly to the States in the middle of the Cold War would surely be put under inspection. He had to think of something else. After considering his options, he finally came up with a plan. He would fill a box with identical-looking floppy disks, one of them containing the old data, and send them to West Berlin, where he would have his friend, Kaminsky, waiting for the package. As Kaminsky owned a data storage company, such a delivery wouldn't be put under suspicion. Then, in West Berlin, far away from any Russian supervision, Kaminsky would send the disks to America. But despite working for the National Department of Defense, Barry didn't want the disks delivered to the American government. He suspected certain individuals in the administration would be corrupted by the old data's evil and use its power to wage terrible wars. Remember, the Cold War was still going on. If one side or the other gained an overwhelming and undeniable advantage, things would not go well for the other side, nor for their innocent civilians. So, Barry opted for hiding its power instead. Although this decision could have been subconsciously influenced by the old data, as because of this very decision, he who ultimately ends up with the karnathal code is the devil himself. See, Barry needed someone to receive the disks in America, someone who wouldn't be put under suspicion for receiving a large number of floppy disks. And wouldn't you know it, the devil in disguise had just recently started work on Inscryption, the video game. And if work was going to continue, they'd need somewhere to store all that game. A perfect alibi for someone to receive a shit ton of floppy disks. Of course, neither Barry nor Kaminsky knew of Lunatus's true identity as the devil, and just saw Gamefuna as a standard game company they could use to complete their plan. Kaminsky would explain everything to the company's CEO, and after receiving the disks, he would get the employees to put the game they had been working on onto all of the disks, including the one with the old data. Now the karnathal code would be hidden by the old data, then the game they put on top of that, then the floppy disk it was all stored on. It was the perfect plan. That was a lot though, so let's do a quick recap on the plan. Barry fills a box with a shit ton of identical looking floppy disks, one of them containing the old data, then sends them to his floppy disk manufacturing friend, Kaminsky. Kaminsky then sends the disks to Gamefuna, the devil-run video game company, although Barry and Kaminsky are completely unaware of that last part. Gamefuna will then plant the game they're working on onto all of the floppy disks, hiding the old data from detection. Finally, the disks will be returned to Barry or Kaminsky. Or at least, that was the plan. Kaminsky received the disks from Barry without any problems, but had to wait for Gamefuna to finish their game before passing the disks on to them. While waiting to send it, he himself took a crack at the old data's encryption, but didn't get anywhere. At the same time, Barry was finally caught and imprisoned by the Soviets, although even under interrogation, he didn't leak any info. While waiting for his employees to finish up Inscryption, Satan acted out upon a new plot of his. All while dealing with Barry, getting him to send him the old data without revealing his true identity and motivations, he had found another opportunity for a seed of chaos to be sown. Remember how a piece of the old data fell onto Barry's grandson's computer? Well, that son, 12-year-old Lionel Snail, began working on a game of his own, Root Beer Tender. Satan somehow found this game and realized that it was tainted with the old data. Not giving up the chance that had presented itself, he quickly threw together a creation known as Gameworks. Presented as a program to help aspiring creators create games and extra NPCs, it was really a way for Satan to study the effect the old data had on games. Lionel took the bait and installed Gameworks onto his computer, giving it full access to his PC. To help with the integration of Gameworks into Lionel's game development, Satan created Irving, a conscious NPC, with the goal of befriending Lionel, slowly persuading him to put his trust into Gameworks. Ever so slowly, he led Lionel down the path that most benefited the devil. Lucifer had also created the Blue Triangles, a device that allowed these conscient game entities to interact with the real world and vice versa, all powered by the old data. Gameworks also served as a place to store Lucifer's NPCs and other servants for later use, including his daemons, which were all left hidden away in Lionel's games. With Gameworks' help, Lionel made Super Weasel Kid, the first of many successes in the series. Things were going pretty well for Lionel, but peace and prosperity never has been interesting, so we're going back to the devil. With an office full of employees clueless about all this evil stuff going on, work on Inscryption was going swimmingly, although things on the other side of the world were not going nearly as well. Barry was still imprisoned, and the Russians were closing in on Kaminsky's position. Not wanting to push his chance any further, he sent the box of discs to Gamefuna prematurely, before they had finished their game. Although he trusted Barry's plan, Kaminsky was beginning to suspect that Gamefuna's intentions may have been less than ideal, but anything would be better than the Soviets. Or, at least, that's what he thought. Gamefuna received the discs, but even after covering them all with the work-in-progress build of Inscryption, development on the game continued. Despite pushback from Kaminsky, Lunatus, CEO of Gamefuna and totally normal person, argued that the old data would be better hidden by a complete game than an incomplete one. So work on Inscryption continued, but why? I mean, the devil may say he wants to hide the old data, but we both know he couldn't care less. His plan of making Gamefuna and then Inscryption all to get the karnathal code has worked. He has the karnathal code. So why is he continuing development? What is putting a game over top of the old data going to do to help him create chaos? It just doesn't make any sense. It'd be best if we waited on this question, and perhaps as the story unfolds, we'll get our answer. While Gamefuna continued work on their game, so did Lionel Snail, having released 2 Super Weasel Kid games, and another, but we don't talk about that one. Previously satisfied with simply guiding Lionel's games, Irving decided now would be the time to take things one step further and set up a contract between Lionel and Gamefuna. Lunatus offered it as further supporting a promising developer by buying his past and future games, but in truth, this was done so Gameworks would have an even easier time studying Lionel's games tainted by the old data. Although why Satan was so intent on this research is still a mystery. Flush with his newfound cash, Lionel decided it was time for a change. He was tired of the boring country he lived in. He wanted to visit big cities full of opportunity, of success, and freedom. You guessed it, Lionel Snail would
Go to America! Greatest country in the world!
The Russian cruise he ventured upon took a bit longer than he might have hoped, but no matter. He was finally in America. After settling down from his long journey, he hired a team of game devs to work on his next game, including a childhood friend of his, Carla. Development on Combat Arena X began, and it had everything going for it. Unfortunately, nothing in the Daniel Mullins-Verse goes well for too long, not even for poor Lionel Snail. Due to his constant proximity to the old data's evil for the past few years, he had developed into a terrible, spiteful, and conceited person. It didn't take long for Carla and the rest of the team to become fed up with his inflated ego, and after letting her anger fester for long enough, Carla decided to get her revenge. Channeling her anger, she started work on an NPC designed purely to create havoc for Lionel, Doubt Clown Sado. While she was meant to be a simple NPC that might create a bug here and a small glitch there, Satan swooped in and upped her power tenfold. Able to detect that an agent of chaos, quite similar to him, was being created, he used the energy of the karnathal code to put an immense amount of power and evil into this NPC, completely unbeknownst to Carla. Once Sado was completed and released into Lionel's games, she left nothing but havoc and death in her wake. Lucifer came to see the creation of this character as his greatest mistake. Not because Sado turned out differently than he expected, no, he loved her. But while he was distracted with this mini-demon's creation, he wasn't supervising his employees at Gamefuna, and one of those employees stumbled upon the old data. As we know from playing Inscryption, the characters on the disc containing the old data became conscient from its power, and learned to search deep under their game's world for a piece of it. When a scribe managed to scavenge a chunk, they would use its power to overturn the game's code and come into power. Gamefuna employee Casey Hobbs just so happened to be playtesting the one disc with the karnathal code as the angler found a piece of the old data deep below the game world, handing it over to Leshy. This was such a revelation to her because neither action had ever been programmed into the game. So you can imagine her shock when she logged in the next day and Leshy appeared in 3D. At this point, she was beyond confused and brought the disc home to investigate further. Throughout the next few weeks, she continued to play Leshy's game, even creating a mod out of it, despite the fact that nobody would ever get to play it. She spent her free time scouring through the old data, learning from all the information it's collected throughout its travels across the world. Reading the log entries from the Soviets on their reconnaissance mission, Barry's plan to get the karnathal code to save her hands, Kaminsky's annoyance with Barry's risky plan, and now it even stored some entries of her own. The old data always has and will continue to absorb information from everyone and everything around it. Casey was especially surprised when she saw Kaminsky's name on the disk, as she had actually met him before. As a Gamefuna employee, she had helped receive the disks sent in by Kaminsky, even talking to him once or twice, although neither knew about the other's involvement in this complicated plot until now. After all this research, Casey now knew all about the plan Barry, Kaminsky, and Gamefuna made to get the old data to America, although the identity of the devil as her boss still remained hidden. I'm sorry, how has nobody caught on to this guy yet? His name is Lou Natus. Are you kidding me? Sorry. Casey began to delve deeper into the disk and learn of the evil truths behind the karnathal code, even found details describing the doomsday machine the Nazis built, still ready to accept the karnathal code, still capable of blowing up half of Europe. Through weeks of heavy deliberation, Casey went back and forth on whether or not she should destroy the disk, walking all the way to the ocean, ready to chuck it into the sea, but in the end, she couldn't. The old data had infiltrated her mind, exploited her connection to Leshy and the rest of the scribes. It made her subconsciously create excuses to not destroy it. Granted, even if she had tried to destroy it, she probably wouldn't be able to, as if such a thing was possible, Barry would have done so from the start. Eventually, Satan returned his focus from Gameworks to Gamefuna and quickly realized that the disk containing the old data had disappeared. The plan he spent literal centuries working towards went up in smoke right before the finish line. In a panic, he got Kaminsky to recall all the disks for quality concerns, but at this point Casey knew what was up. She had read the entries and knew Kaminsky wasn't oblivious to the situation. There were no quality concerns, he just needed to get the disk back. Not trusting Kaminsky or Gamefuna, Casey decided to hide the disk. She put it in a small wooden box and hid it buried in a nearby forest, only writing down the coordinates inside a sealed deck of cards, unsure if she'd keep them for later or burn them, hiding the old data forever. She spent a few days contemplating her choice, but ran out of time. Lucifer found out she was the one who stole the disk and had her killed. Alas, at the very same time, another young developer met the same fate. Lionel Snail's characters finally managed to open a portal long enough to exact their revenge. Although Sado also took advantage of this situation and entered the portal, escaping into the real world. With Lionel dead, the commands she was created with of create chaos for Lionel were no longer applicable, and were now just create chaos in whichever way she saw fit. So she went to Gamefuna to meet her true master, Satan. Although whether she really wanted to help him in his goal of retrieving the karnathal code remains to be seen. After killing Casey, Satan turned over mountains looking for the old data, but no matter how hard he searched, he couldn't find it. You may remember me saying he could sense the location of the karnathal code. That's how he figured out it was in the hands of the Soviets. And yes, I do stand by that, but it seems to be a very general area, like somewhere within a state. Better than nothing, but it's not going to help him when it's buried somewhere within hundreds of miles of forest. Here, our story comes to a sort of standstill. Casey's been killed, same goes for Lionel, and the old data's buried somewhere in a forest, which takes Satan and his lackeys out of the fold. So for a while, things became stagnant. In this lull of action, it would be a good time to resume where everything and everyone is at. The original karnathal code still lies on Hitler's corpse, but it's unclear if it still retains its power after the code was transcribed onto the old data. The doomsday device the Nazis built under Europe is still there, and ready to be armed by the karnathal code. Satan, CEO of Gamefuna, searches for the old data, along with Sado, who has made her way to Gamefuna after escaping Lionel's computer, as well as Kaminsky, helping to find the karnathal code so he can hide it again. He's also still unaware of the devil's true identity and intentions. Casey's been killed by the devil after he found out she learnt of the old data, and Lionel's been killed by his very own characters out of revenge for creating them. That would normally mean that Irving and the rest of Gameworks are out of a job, except Irving was shot by another one of Lionel's characters moments before Lionel's death, and the employees were brutally massacred minutes before. The old data still remains hidden in the forest, where Leshy, currently in control of the game world, awaits for someone to find him and play his game. But what about Barry? Last we saw him, he had been imprisoned by the Russians just after sending the old data to Kaminsky. Well, we have multiple credible sources that give us conflicting answers. Casey was pretty convinced he escaped the Russian prison, making it all the way to the States, although she never managed to contact him. On the other hand, we have Barry's tarot card, which tells us that he did not outlive his plot, and that once he was discovered, presumably by the Russians, he was put to the gun. This seems to imply that he was killed after being captured, not living long enough to see where this story would go. Barry never does return in our story, so although fun to theorize, I suppose what really happened isn't all too relevant. But if I were a gambling man, I'd wager he might just make another appearance in Daniel's next game. If only the old data remained hidden, perhaps our story could have ended here, somewhat peacefully, but it seems such a resolution wasn't in the cards. Before we find out how this evil artifact was eventually unearthed, we must first talk about its next victim, Luke Carter. Luke was a pretty generic young man. Oh, but how to describe him? In a word, gorgeous. Like, really good looking. I mean, I'm not even mentioning his overflowing charisma. Although, on a side note, I guess he may have enjoyed card collecting, and shared that hobby with his sister, Elle. We know very little about her, only ever receiving snippets of info about their close connection, and the fact that she came to an untimely demise. To distract himself from the overwhelming grief, Luke created a YouTube channel in memory of what the two spent their time enjoying together, collecting cards. The channel was going well, and Luke finally began to grow out of the shell of despair he had encased himself in. He was beginning to be happy again. Enjoying, playing, and collecting cards was now how he remembered and respected his sister's memory. Some time after his channel had begun to hit it off, he bought a certain pack of cards from a woman at a garage sale. This woman just so happened to be Casey's mom, finally selling off some of her dead daughter's possessions. And that deck of cards Luke bought were the very ones Casey wrote the old data's coordinates on. As we know, Luke opens the card pack, finds the coordinates written on the cards, and heads out with his trusty shovel in search of buried treasure. He found it all right, but little did he know how much misfortune this treasure would bring upon him. After bringing the disc home, he set up his camcorder, booted up Inscryption, and began to play Leshy's game. It took him a while, but with the help of the 3 other scribes, he managed to defeat Leshy, resetting the game to its preset world. In between recording sessions, Luke had asked his fans about this digital copy of Inscryption. Surely it couldn't be the only one out there, but nobody had even heard of it. This is, of course, because the game is still in development at Gamefuna, with no advertising because it was never meant for public purchase, only a cover for the old data. Once he realized he wasn't going to get any real info from his fans, he went straight to the source, and this was Luke's fatal mistake. Recognizing their card game with the same name, he emailed Gamefuna, asking them if they knew about this Inscryption disc he found. Immediately after receiving the email, Satan knew he had found his lost disc, the one containing the old data, and he would stop at nothing to get it back. He did try the classic, give it back, but Luke played the tactical card of not doing that. So Lucifer resorted to other, more drastic options. Enter left stage, Dark Clown Sado. Now here we meet a split in the road, two possible theories for what's really going on here. There's compelling evidence for both, but nothing definitely proving one or the other. Not yet at least. It's undeniable that Sado is the one who shows up at Luke's door, as we see from a few flashes that reveal her true identity. Whether she's simply possessing a body or has created one with her powers is largely irrelevant. The important thing is figuring out why she's here. There's the obvious answer, that after escaping Lionel's world, she made her way to Gamefuna and met up with the one who gave her her unique powers, and joined Gameworks as Satan's right-hand man. While she's erratic and unpredictable, he chose her to be the one to investigate the missing disc, as she's one of the few who knows of the old data buried within. But there's another theory. While it's undeniable that Sado escaped Lionel's computer and is now confronting Luke for the disc, what if she never met up with the devil? Perhaps, using her glitch powers, she stopped Luke's email from ever reaching Gamefuna and merely pretends to be a representative, working to get the old data for herself and her own uses. This could also explain why Gamefuna didn't outright kill and take the disc from Luke immediately after learning he had it, as they did with Casey. For now, both theories are valid, and we will continue observing the possibilities for both options as we continue our story. After being told off by Luke, Sado began discreetly messing with him, and it didn't take long before he started to go insane. Not at all helped by the still recent grief of losing his sister. While he had patched up his torn heart with the creation of his YouTube channel, Sado's carnage on his mind shattered those barriers, and it all came flooding back. Having to deal with his sister's death, Sado messing with his mind, and the old data's evil, Luke's mental state began to deteriorate even faster. He now spent all of his time playing through Inscryption. In Luke's playthrough, PO3 was the scribe to find a piece of the old data, taking over the game world. With his power as the head scribe, he managed to trick Luke into helping him initiate the great transcendence. Only too late would Luke realize its true meaning. By using Luke to design the game, and his PC to gain access to his hard drive, take screenshots and connect everything to the web, PO3 was ready to upload his version of Inscryption onto the internet for the entire world to play. The great transcendence was ready to begin. Unlike Sado and Lucifer, who are motivated by a desire for chaos, this plan PO3 had concocted was one entirely created out of self-preservation. After posting the game, there would be thousands of copies of Inscryption out there. While he wouldn't be in control of all of the game worlds, he still would be in many others. Now, the big question is whether the old data would also be transcribed to the computers of everyone who downloaded the game. Luckily, that doesn't matter, as while PO3 gloated to Luke, Leshy tore his fucking head off, stopping the upload. Leshy and Magnificus wanted to reset the world, continuing the cycle, continuing their game. But Grimoire no longer wanted to live in this hell. She acknowledged the evil of the old data, so in an effort to save herself from this world of eternal torment, and to save the world from the evil of this old data, she deleted the game. Unfortunately, no mere computer is strong enough to delete the power of the karnathal code. And even after everything was gone, game, characters, and even the scribes, the old data still remained. Luke did not heed the warnings of the woodcarver and took a look at the old data. We can see many familiar files the old data has collected on its journey. The log entries of Barry, Kaminsky, and Casey, Barry's identification, a card from the karnathal code, Hitler's pocket containing the karnathal code, and more. The recording began to break under the stress, but Luke clearly saw something that deeply disturbed him, because even the influence over minds the old data has wasn't enough to save it from some bludgeoning with a hammer. After regaining his composure, Luke called a journalist group and began to report Gamefuna's secrets, when Sado knocked at the door and decided she was done playing. Now, she could have killed him because he was about to reveal Gamefuna's scheming, because he saw deep within the old data revealing its secrets, or because of what happened next. After much ARG solving by the Inscryption community, Daniel Mullins released this video. We see that the Great Transcendence has been interrupted, but suddenly, seemingly for no reason, it resumes and completes. Now, back to why Sado killed Luke. If she was indeed walking alone, without the support of Gamefuna and, by extension, the devil, she probably wouldn't care about Gamefuna being exposed to the media, and she probably wouldn't care about Luke seeing the old data. But there is the possibility that she made this sudden leap in action to manually resume the Great Transcendence, as she wouldn't want something with so much chaotic potential being stopped. But there lies another answer. Let's assume that she has been working with the devil, and has been visiting Luke under Gamefuna's supervision. The obvious counter-argument would be, well, why didn't she just take the disc after shooting Luke and return it to Gamefuna? This stops the Great Transcendence and returns the power of the karnathal code into Satan's hands. But remember, Satan doesn't just want power for power. He, just like Sado, wants power to create chaos in the mortal realm. After learning of what PO3 had Luke unknowingly walking towards, he decided to do a little improv. After all, despite being pushed forwards by nigh opposite motivations, PO3's plan of transcendence was quite similar to his own. The devil decided he was going to spread the power of the karnathal code to the entire planet. It finally makes sense. This is what he's been walking towards for so long now. It's why he created Gamefuna, why he had them create a game to hide the old data, why he convinced Barry and Kaminsky to leave the karnathal code in his company's care. The creation of Irving alongside Gameworks really was to study games affected by the old data, but more specifically, how those games reacted when they were published and spread across the world. Lionel's games only had a small piece of the old data afflicting them, but now it's time for the real deal. Despite their different motivations and end goals, PO3 and the devil had been working towards the same thing. Capitalizing on what PO3 had started, Lucifer decided it was finally time to put his plan into action, and commanded Sado to resume the Great Transcendence, releasing Inscryption and the old data to the entire world. The Great Transcendence is finally underway and chaos is sure to ensue, but what happens next? Will Barry make his return? Will we learn of Satan's pure evil father? Will we finally decrypt the karnathal code? Unfortunately, we'll have to wait for Daniel's next game to find out what becomes of the world. And that's it. I finally made all the videos explaining Daniel Mullins' games. Wow, that took way too long. I put a lot of work into these, so if you consider subscribing, hey, that'd mean a great deal to me. But regardless, keep listening if you're interested in some channel updates. Maybe not my next, but an upcoming video will be on answering questions people get from this video. So feel free to ask in the comments below or in my Discord, which is linked in the description. For other future videos, well, I'm not too sure. Don't worry, I'll still be doing Inscryption content, but it's not going to be the only focus anymore. I have some fun upcoming videos planned that, if you give them a chance, I'm sure you'll find them enjoyable, or at least I hope so. And finally, thank you. If you've watched till the end, chances are you've probably also watched my Inscryption video and some of my other ones. It's people like you that have brought my channel from a mere 84 to a 2,000 subscription channel. It's people like you that help me keep pushing myself when I lack motivation. It really means a lot to me that anyone would watch my stuff, so again, thank you. Anyway, stay hyped for my next video where I make a juicy fanfic of me and Luke Carter having hot and steamy